I'm Reverend J. Stewart Glover, and you're listening to Faith Talk. There is a scripture that comes from Romans chapter 12 and verse 2 that reads in this way. It says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." As a matter of fact, I might be bold enough to say that this scripture reminds me of the original meaning and use of the term woke. Unfortunately, this term has now been taken out of the context of its original use and is now being applied by some people to support other ideological arguments. But in a world facing rapid political shifts, economic challenges, and the looming threats of war, the timeless scripture, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind," from Romans 12:2 offers us profound guidance. This verse invites people to wake up and resist being molded by worldly values and instead be transformed through a renewed mind that aligns themselves with God's will and purpose for the betterment of all of humanity. So let's just talk about nonconformity for a moment. Nonconformity in the context of Romans 12 means not patterning oneself after the world, being shaped by it, or being pressed into its mold. It implies not going along with what appears to be the dominant narrative in the world. This scripture offers wise counsel that we can draw relevance from for today. Why? Because we're living through a period in history where there is much focus and much energy on political power, economic power, territorial power that is fueled by corruption, greed, exploitation, and violence as a means to an end. This scripture invites us to stand antithetical to these values and practices. So instead of normalizing these worldly influences or ways of the world, we are called to be agents of change in the world. So this transformation by the renewal of the mind, as in the context of Romans 12:2, it brings our attention to the power of God that is able to rescue us from mentally and spiritually buying into and being lulled to sleep by this narrative of power, acquisition, consumerism, exploitation, and violence. During these challenging days, we need to be intentional and deliberate about having daily spiritual retreats in which we engage with scripture, prayer, meditation, and we fellowship with a faith community. Why is this so important? Well, these faith practices actually, by the grace of God, guide and strengthen us toward resisting the pressure to adopt and assimilate to the values and behaviors of a secular-minded world. I once interviewed a gentleman on my podcast at least a year ago or more, and today I saw a social media post of his that he announced he was moving to Spain or had already moved to Spain. I'm not going to mention his name, and if he hears this, reach out to me and let's talk about it. I was impressed with why he moved, and I'm not making any recommendations. I'm just impressed by his move. He was working in corporate America, doing well financially with a $300,000 salary. However, he found himself working 80-hour weeks in a toxic environment. His job had taken over his life and robbed him of being the authentic person that he wanted to be. So he left behind the $300,000 job and is now living off of $2,500 a month in Spain, where his sons are playing soccer and he and his sons are living out their dream. So what I really loved about this story was that he detached himself from that which held him captive economically, physically, and spiritually. Now, I'm pretty confident that he had to make adjustments to his consumer spending habits as well. But I admire his leap of faith and integrity when it came to building a life of dream fulfillment with his sons. Now, this is an example of someone who chose to live life on his terms in line with his values and convictions. And again, as much as I admire his story, I'm not recommending this specific course of action to anyone in particular. We're just looking at his story because we're all different and we have different needs. But there is a way, one practical way that I would like to highlight today and recommend in order to resist the pullings of society. And that is being more intentional about our consumer behaviors, more specifically, our spending habits. So in order to get to a place of spending counterculturally requires a bit of an analysis of your spending habits. Why? To understand where your money is going. And then praying over the results of your analysis to determine how best to use those resources in the future. Perhaps you can seek ways to limit or cut the superfluous spending on things that really do not add value to life. Questions for us, questions for young people, questions for young and old. Are you still paying more for and buying designer clothes? Are you giving your economic power over to companies that don't share your social or your environmental values? Simply put, are you supporting companies that don't support you in return? Are you spending disproportionate amounts of money on ordering unhealthy, damaging foods online to be delivered to your door? Is jewelry, like diamonds, so important to you? And if so, why? Are the products that you are purchasing causing environmental and social damage where they are manufactured or disposed of? The truth of the matter is this: if we stopped spending our money to satisfy media-driven addictions and giving our money to companies that don't share our values, guess what? We can free up our resources to be spent where they can contribute to making our communities a better place and helping to build each other up. So in closing, I would just like to say this. This is something that we know. I just feel like we need to be reminded of this today. So to begin the journey of living counterculturally and not being conformed to the patterns of this world, first and foremost, be more attentive to your spiritual life with regular prayer, scripture reflection, and meditation, and gathering together with a faith community. Secondly, to begin this journey, we can begin to focus on intentional consumption and generosity. Unlike the consumer culture that encourages buying things that we do not need, aim to consume intentionally and live with less. Adopt practices of contentment and generosity as creative acts of resistance, very spiritual acts of resistance in an age that is obsessed with acquisition. In these troubling times, I believe that this is something that we know and just need to be reminded of. I'm Reverend J. Stewart Glover, and you are listening to Faith Talk. These episodes are available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. So please share with your family and friends. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.